Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great opening salvo. Could not agree more. Ian Mackey, State Representative, District 99 in St. Louis County, here to present House Joint Resolution 27. The reason this is a House Joint Resolution is because when December rolled around and it was time to pre-file bills, I knew that I wanted to restart the conversation on the city-county merger. This is a conversation I've been a part of since my very first campaign in 2018, 8 years ago. It's something I've talked about in my community. It's something I've talked to with my constituents. It's something I've engaged on with folks in this building and back home. And I wanted to start the process of having that discussion in a formal way here. So what I did was I filed the word-for-word proposal from the organization Better Together, what they had proposed in 2018. It was a good blueprint, not perfect. No way of going about this is going to be perfect, but it was a blueprint on paper. I wanted to have conversations with my friends, our colleagues in the media, in the press, to get this in front of folks. I thought rather than call a journalist and say, hey, can we talk about the city-county merger? I think we should get that going again. I thought, let's file a piece of legislation to get that going again. Just like you heard from every bill sponsor who's been here today with 11 days left, what are we doing? We're having a conversation. So back home in my district, we had a meeting on January 24th at the center of Clayton, right in the center of my district. We had, I'm bad at estimating, but I say around 300 or more people show up, and I see people nod their heads up and down when I estimate that crowd. It was huge. Something unique about this piece of legislation is right out of the gate, it's got at least 1,000 opponents. That's the number of elected officials in St. Louis County. And I'm pretty sure 100% of them are against this. You'll hear from them today. What I will tell you, and this has come as a shock to many that I've spoken to, there are a lot of folks in St. Louis who want this. I polled my district my freshman year in 2019. The 87th district at the time included all of Clayton, most of Ladue, part of U City, University City, part of Richmond Heights, and part of Brentwood. And I asked them, do you support the St. Louis City-County merger plan as it has been proposed by Better Together? Those are the exact words I have filed here today. 991 people in my district, 991 constituents wrote back, and a plurality of them said yes. 423 people, 42% said yes, we support that plan in 2019. We have an online petition from change.org with over 900 signatures. The goal of that is not to get 50% plus one of St. Louisans to say this is a thing. It's to show folks that from every single zip code in St. Louis City and St. Louis County, there is someone who lives there who wants this to happen. Obviously, folks in elected office, many of whom are my friends. Mayor Jackson from Beverly Hills was the first one I saw today. We've had a lot of discussions. I understand their opposition to this, and I've learned from it. They've helped put into focus for me why this is important to me. The Better Together discussion focused a lot on streamlining government services and government efficiency. And unsurprisingly, a lot of folks at our first meeting in Clayton and our subsequent meeting at UMSL and the meetings we'll have in the future, a lot of folks presumed, understandably, that that would be my motivation as well. And it's not. It's not my motivation at all. This isn't my let's fix North County solution. North County's doing great. The 24-1 cooperative is leading the way toward a merger. The conversations I've had with the mayors in North County have decided to collectively police their communities. Collective courts, collective trash, collective all the government services that people talked about streamlining, they're already doing it. I think the only thing this changes for them is the title of mayor. It doesn't change the work they do. This isn't my fix St. Louis City problem. Yes, St. Louis City loses 93 families a month. It's down to 270,000 in population. Yes, that's a problem. The county's been stagnant over the last decade and has lost population in the last several years as well. And you'll hear from friends, well, that's just unincorporated county. Chesterfield's growing. What kind of a system is that? There was a gentleman at one of our town halls who was related to somebody who proposed the Burroughs Plan in 1962. That's how long we've been talking about this, guys. In terms of the folks who want to talk about incremental change, we've had 60 years to have incremental change. The article that he presented from the Post-Dispatch from 1962 cited the population of St. Louis City and St. Louis County as 1.5 million people. Today, it's 1.3 million people. That's not just a city problem, not just a county problem. It's our problem together. We have more deaths and births with no way out. We export more talent than we import. with seemingly no way out. Clayton, where I live, can't tell its story to the rest of the country. My friend Mayor Jackson's town, Beverly Hills, could try. We can all try. The story that gets told to the rest of the country is St. Louis. And if we're a city of 1.5 million people in this state, we can tell our story and we can grow again, which is better for our state, which is one reason why this is a state issue. I know that's on folks' minds too. Why is this a state issue? Well, for one, municipalities are created by statute. That's one. Two, I had somebody in my one of the first town hall in Clayton say, why should somebody in Neosho get to decide what happens in St. Louis? And I said, can I introduce you to the budget chair? He's from south of Neosho. He's from McDonald County. He decides every day what happens in St. Louis. We do this work together, and we need to do this work together. In Indianapolis and Louisville, which are common examples of cities in our region who have done this, it's required state involvement. And that's not surprising. Two sides don't get along, often need a mediator. And I think I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I got a couple questions, and from reading it, and we spoke. It's a copy of Better Together, but again, the start of the conversation. So one, and I kind of vaguely remember this from going to the town halls and Better Together. Is there a way to not make this a state vote?
I don't know. And so, yeah, part of this, discussion is having more meetings in the interim, sitting down with some more experts from these other jurisdictions to figure out how they've done it. I don't know. So I do know that when Better Together made it a House Joint Resolution, they were on the record saying that in order, for their perspective, was in order to do some of the policing consolidations they wanted to. There's a lot of law enforcement language in our state constitution. And they thought in order to change some of that law enforcement language and to consolidate some law enforcement agencies or operations, they needed a constitutional amendment to do that. I haven't vetted that. That's not my field of legal expertise either. That's a conversation to have. I know there's folks who think that this can be done in a simple statute way. There's folks who think it should be done locally. We have a process, you'll probably hear about it today, called the Board of Freeholders, where I don't know, there was a problem with Better Together where the county appointed their folks, the city didn't. There was a political breakdown. Again, two sides not getting along, sometimes need a mediator. I don't see the Board of Freeholders as being the way out. I know a lot of folks have talked about the city rejoining the county, and that seems to be where there's a little bit of movement together. I don't think that's nearly going to solve hardly any of the problems I talked about today. I don't know if there's a way to just have it at a local vote, because it's affecting so many things that are in statute.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you know this, but for on the record, obviously I heavily oppose this as it stands today. I opposed it before I was an elected official. I oppose it now. But my interest in it, more or less, is some what you bring up, and it's a hot topic these days in the new presidential administration, is just the DOJ aspect of this. Obviously, with St. Louis County and St. Louis City, there's a lot of, as you said, government inefficiency. And so there is some Republican things of nature in here. Would you agree?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, a lot of folks on my side of the aisle in 2018 were rather surprised out of the gate at my support, because it was pushed by folks who traditionally, the faces of that campaign were folks who traditionally are on the right-wing side of politics. Yeah. There's a lot in there from that perspective, sure.
Okay. And then I just had a fire district issue this morning in another hearing. So there's a number of issues in St. Louis County. I don't think this fixes it, but again, I think the conversation is good because there are some things that we need help with. And I think every representative from St. Louis region, and we have a few on this committee, we are constantly in a battle like I was in this morning, whether it's a fire district issue or a policing issue or a taxation issue or a levy, whatever it might be, considering some sort of municipal statute versus state statute. And it is a headache. The charter law versus state law are fights that have been going on for, again, decades. And so I do appreciate that aspect of it, but then I'm a heavy opponent of the merger because I chose, you get the argument all the time, I'm sure. I choose to live in the county. I choose to live in Crestwood. I choose to live in Beverly Hills, wherever it is. I didn't want to live in the city for a reason. And so that's my big opposition to it. And the St. Louis City does have problems, and many people know that. I've talked about that probably way too long, and I don't want to be a part of those problems. I didn't move there for that reason. So I think you have to handle this very delicately because there's so much opposition to it, and it has to be done in such a thoughtful way. And I also don't want it to go to a statewide vote. And so I don't know what the process is around that either, but I'm sure many people will have conversations on it. Really, that's all I had, Representative, because most of it, as you said, is better together. I don't see anything. The school districts remain the same. There's a new fire district. The one question I did have, because we just passed it, is how this would affect policing. Because now we have a state board in the city and not in the county, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that as well.
Sure. So, my understanding and recollection is, of course, bargaining agreements stay in place. All the salaries and all the that issue is addressed throughout there. But yeah, I mean, it's one police department. I don't know now with the state takeover if that would be a conflict that we would have to resolve. I'm sure it probably would be, but I think we could do that. Okay, and then. The other kind of question I had was on the federal level, because there's a section in here, and I saw that when Better Together came through. It still leaves I wonder if it's counterproductive is my overall question, because we're leaving the designations of the city and the county the same for federal monies and federal regulations. Is that counterproductive to the entire merger? I will tell you that part I don't understand.
Okay.
I won't vouch for that part.
Okay.
I'll leave that alone.
And then I do see it phases out the earnings tax.
It does, and I think that's really important. I think that's something that should happen, absolutely. Okay. I think it's a really antiquated way to collect revenue.
Okay, good. Those are the only questions I had. I obviously, again, I'm not going to vote this out. I oppose this. The conversation's good. If you could change things about it, and we've had some discussions, about this, just to kind of explain more how you would envision where you could probably get more agreement on this. Is it where the county actually swallows the city then and it's not a true merger? Or what's your thoughts around that?
I mean, I hear that proposed a lot. I don't see that taking any less political capital than dissolving the 88 municipalities. I really don't. And if we're going to expend that political energy and capital and push that boulder up the hill, why would we not try to get the biggest win possible? The city rejoining the county is going to dissolve some departments. It's going to streamline some services. It'll be a little doji. That'll be fine. It's not going to help us tell our story to the rest of the region, I don't think. To the rest of the nation. It's not going to help us get more births than deaths, which is what we need. It's not going to help us recruit more talent. It's not going to help prevent talent from leaving. It's just going to streamline some government services. And again, it's not about government services. That's not why people choose to live where they choose to live. Did you choose to live in Sunset Hills because of the government services, or was it the schools and the crime rate and the pretty yards and the commute to work, Jefferson City excluded? Of course it was. It was the salary of the job you're getting in that neighborhood. That's why people choose to live where they live, not because of how quickly the streets are cleaned or shown up. Obviously, those are important things. Obviously, those are incredibly important things. Obviously, that's when people learn who the name of their mayor is, because they otherwise probably don't know. That's when they learn the name of their state rep, because they otherwise probably don't know. That's when we hear from them and respond, and those are important things. Delivery of government services isn't why people choose to live where they want to live. It's way bigger than that.
Yep. I appreciate that. Other questions for Representative Fuchs?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To inquire.
Please.
I also like when we agree on things. It's really great.
I thought I was clear I'm not in agreement.
Oh, no, but I agree with you on your status of this bill. Okay, that's what we agree on. Thank you, Representative Mackey, for bringing this forward. It is a conversation that the region's been having for a very long time. As somebody who grew up in St. Louis County, who's lived in the city longer, I have a hybrid analysis of my lived experiences of both city-county living. So I have some questions. Settle in. No. Questions just starting about, so I appreciate you were talking about how the bill was drafted and that it's better together, just kind of like in this version. So that's the place we're starting from. I appreciate the chairman's inquiry about why everyone in the state gets to vote on this, and I tend to agree with the chairman on that. So my questions will start with when we were having conversations, so you were talking about meetings. Who are these meetings with, and what stakeholders were convened to have this conversation about the legislation we're seeing today?
You mean to craft the legislation we're seeing today? Yeah, none. This is the beginning of the conversation.
Okay.
And that's come up several times. And it's hard, it's really kind of counterproductive or not really productive at all to explain the inner workings of Jefferson City as a defense, in St. Louis. But since we're in Jefferson City, and since you and I are legislators, I don't see this as different than any other bill that's filed. It starts a conversation. How many times do we get a bill presentation and then immediately, and here's the substitute because we've already changed some things, right? It's the start of the conversation. Again, I can't call my friends at Fox 2 and say, hey, I got this thing I want to talk about. I got to file something first. As soon as it was filed, we were only 3 weeks into legislative session when we had that meeting in Clayton, where, again, 300 plus people showed up. And yes, was the first hour and a half mostly elected officials expressing their disagreement? Yes. And then maybe when some attention spans wore off, there were talent recruitment people, developers, moms, parents, individuals, citizens who desperately want this, who also showed up. We had a meeting at UMSL in North County because there were folks at that Clayton meeting who said, hey, we want you to come to UMSL. I had a former campaign volunteer who's now a professor there who works on these issues, who was on our panel. A lot of my friends in North County, that's their territory. We figured that was the next great place to go. And I hope to have a meeting in the city as soon as session's over. And we'll have plenty more. Again, I've been pulling my constituents on it since 2019.
Really?
So these are the stakeholders for me, right? My constituents, and the plurality of them said they want this. So for me, that's how I got here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Sure.
I think, so for me, having been brought up in social work, one of the things we do is we talk to our stakeholders before we make a decision, because we want to make sure that the people who are impacted by the decision are at the table.
Right.
So we, yes, you have your approach and it's totally valid. And also sometimes good governance means convening the people so that when the conversation is started, it starts from maybe more of let's just say it was a little agitating and people were like, what's he doing? And why is Representative Mackey doing this? Right? So it kind of escalated things. So now we're trying to bring the temperature down so we can have a good conversation, which is what we're doing today. So thank you to the chairman for having, and you both for having this conversation so that we can have this talk going forward. I have some questions about how the convening of the group looks. So if we're looking at the legislation as it's written, it gives a lot of leeway to the county still being kind of in the governance part of things, and St. Louis City gets it feels like St. Louis City gets during the 5-year transition plan, City of St. Louis, for the first 4 years before there's a formation of the board or the new Metropolitan Council. Seems like the county takes more ownership of governance. Is that the way you interpret the legislation?
I remember that being an argument, obviously, the first time around, and obviously Steve Stenger was running the county, and we all know what happened there. I will tell you what my idea would be moving forward if I were to write a House Committee substitute. I would like a plan, if it were to pass, whether that's a local vote, a state vote, if this were to pass and we were going to say we're going to have this merger and be one city of 1.5 million people, I would want a delayed plan after the next election of the mayor of St. Louis and the county executive so that voters would know I am voting for the people who are going to run this new government. That's ideally what I would put forward.
Okay.
And the city and the seat of government, by the way, is in the city of St. Louis.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Great.
Could there be a transition advisory board written into this new House Committee sub? Let's say we talk about what's happening next year. So I'm thinking of what would a transition advisory board look like? Because it seems like in this way it's currently written, there's maybe some gaps in governance. So
Sure.
I'm wondering, would there be an ability to have a transition advisory board maybe written into this?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
And then I'm also curious about if we could create a framework to determine that the new council, so when the Metropolitan Council is, now I know that there's it's written in here that there would be new folks appointed to create different districts. As I was reading it, it felt very Hunger Games. I do want to just say that. To create different districts. And so to that keeping, could there be a framework that we write into the legislation that the council be required to reflect the population demographics? Because what I'm worried about is if we already are seeing an apathy for voter engagement in the city, in some demographics. What happens when people don't turn out to vote? Now there's folks that are running our city, county, metropolitan that may not reflect the entire, really help to reflect the city.
Sure.
Because there's only so many places in the state some of us can live.
Sure.
That's just a fact.
Yeah. So two thoughts on that. One, I think it makes sense. I mean, at the federal level, we have districts that are protected through the Voting Rights Act, right? I think there's a way that you could do that through this new council to protect minority populations and the representation that they elect, certainly. But I'll also say I do support that, to be clear. Also, look at, Kansas City. Kansas City is 35% non-white. That includes our black friends and any person of color who's not white, 35%. They've had 2 consecutive 2-term black mayors going back to 2010 who've run that city. So we had to think about both of those things.
Yeah, definitely. Let me just check my notes. So are you saying that it's possible that this is just, when I was in college and I needed to get a paper done, I just kind of wrote it out there, and maybe it wasn't the final product.
No.
So we can.
No.
Okay.
No. That would negate going back to 2019 and talking to my constituents about their thoughts on this and having all those meetings with stakeholders that you were talking about that I have had for the last 8 years. That would negate all of that.
Okay.
Correct.
And then what would, what is the appetite for leadership in this state, at the top?
What do you mean?
So in the way that we work in the super minority, you know this, often we play this game of how do you make a bad bill better?
Okay.
So if the governor wants this, or whoever becomes the governor next, or whatever that looks like, then it's likely that this becomes a priority, right? And so if that were a priority, I'm just curious about how we would work together to make this the best that it could be for both folks. And do you know if it is a priority?
Of our current governor? I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay. Maybe I'll talk to the old
Usually when I've tried to reach out to the governor's staff to ask them their thoughts on my bill ideas, they say, has it had a hearing?
Oh.
So I thought we'd do this first.
Okay.
Usually that's the response I get. Because, I don't know about you, I filed 20 bills. I would love to know his position on all of them.
Yeah.
And usually the response I get is, has this had a hearing? Mm-hmm. So maybe after today we can find out.
I'm just seeing a lot of, Republican interest in the city of St. Louis.
Sure.
And that if this became a priority, I imagine that we would have to work really hard to make it the best that it could be for the citizens who currently live in the city of St. Louis and who may be in the county, who may be fearful about losing representation or, I don't know. I want to make sure that those of us can stay in the city.
Of course. Absolutely.
Okay.
You bet.
All right. Thanks, Ian. Thank you, Representative.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Haruza,
To inquire.
please.
So, our districts are adjacent to each other, so I'm in the same general area. I'm concerned about the state telling the city and county people how they should, kind of purport themselves and where they should be. So the example that I would have is recently there was a vote in unincorporated St. Louis County near Queenie Park about joining with Manchester, which is adjacent. And the vote of the people that lived in St. Louis County part of it, so the unincorporated, was 2-1 against the merger, while Manchester were 2-1 in favor. And that tells me that it's not so uniform. I actually saw your diagram, and as you've carefully stated, it's a plurality because the bars were almost equal. So I just don't feel that it's our place at the state level to tell our communities how they should be governed, because many people are very proud of that. I know Kirkwood is very proud of Kirkwood, and Webster Groves, they have the big game every year, the high school. So I just worry that I don't want us to become, I'm going to use the example of Chicago, which is this big city and lots of issues. So
Sure.
I'm just wondering whether we can get those efficiencies that certainly we sorely need. I mean, I know I live in a town of 363 people in a little town, but we figured out efficiencies by working with some of the surrounding areas. So is there a possible way to try to get some of those Doge-like efficiencies through working together? The fire district is one, and allow the communities to keep their current individual, area of where they feel pride in their community.
Sure. So, yeah, a few things. Certainly there are, and I think the 24-1 Collaborative in North County is the perfect example of that. There are certainly ways to create government efficiencies through cooperation, but back to what we were talking about earlier, for me, that is not going to get us where we need to get demographically. Government efficiencies aren't going to pull us out of our demographic winter. That's not going to do it. So it's got to be way bigger than that. When it comes to the state takeover, I don't know if I'm the only person sitting here who's like listening to the conversation about the state takeover of the police and the same people who support that being against the state being involved on this issue. If I'm mistaken, you supported the state takeover of the police as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, different issues, but can we think through, if we're just going to make generalized statements about state involvement, let's get a little more nuanced in that conversation. To just blanket say, as I supported the bill too, like you, as to just say, the state shouldn't be deciding what happens in St. Louis. Meanwhile, but we do the same thing everywhere. We decide what happens in this state. That's our job. That's my response to that point.
Well, so yeah, and to me, I guess my response to the idea of that, that we're one big city, then that would make it better. I actually think it's more important. So what would happen now if we just did it right now? About a big city, with the situation we have currently, we get a black mark because of the perception of high crime rates across the country in St. Louis. And that's the whole region as far as the country is concerned. But so if we become one big city, we can market it, well, we still are going to have the same problem. It's just going to be a bigger area that's going to be tar and feathered, so to speak. So that's my concern. I think we have to clean up our act before we talk about becoming all together.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, we will now begin public testimony on House Bill